Hi there, so I wanted to put together a really quick tutorial video that I've kind of created before, but want to do a remake that's more updated. What I'm going to cover today is just a really quick video about creating a default scene in both Cinema 4D and After Effects, um, as well as a few preferences changes that should help with your workflow and hopefully help you be able to work a little bit faster as projects continue on. So I'm going to start off in Cinema 4D. The very first thing that I always change in here whenever I start up a project is when the project settings are open here. If they're not open for you and, I don't know, maybe something else is open, you just have to hit Control D and that'll show you your project settings. And so in here, I want to change this to 24 frames per second. And then down here in the timeline, I want to say have at least 5 seconds at the beginning. So 5 times 24, so 5 asterisk 24 will give me 5 seconds. That's 120 frames. And then next, I would like to change my viewport settings. So that'll be Shift V. And in here, we just need to go straight to the effects panel and turn on our transparency, shadows, and SSAO. These settings are also found over here in options. If I click this little bar here, it'll undock it, or at least give me a little palette of this. And as you can see, when I turn these off in here, it also turns them off over here. So in case you ever needed to find that, that's there. The next thing is recommendations for things that you might populate into your scene on a typical, like maybe on a regular basis. Maybe, you find you're always, you can't find the center of the world, so you make a cube, or, maybe you're always making a floor plane. And so you can, maybe make a disk, make it larger, make it have more segments. Object tab, maybe not this one, but this one. So that way it's smoother, so on and so forth, things that you notice you're typically turning on and off. NB is our shortcut for display garage shading lines. Maybe, you can have that already turned on whenever you start up your scene. Maybe you notice you're making lights or cameras or so on and so forth. Populate your scene with those things. And then save the file. I don't really start with those just because I never really know what I'm going to be making and I don't always have lights. But if you notice that typically in your workflow those are things that you make, then I recommend setting up your scene and working from there. But one thing that I do always end up needing is I typically make a null and I name this null backup. So that way I can put anything, I guess, backup versions of whatever I'm modeling or animating into this null and fold it up so that way it's like a little folder. And to further clarify that it's a folder to me, I like to select the null, come down to the basic tab, and then this is typically closed, but you open it up and it shows you that you can change the icon. And so I'm going to load the presets. In the presets, there is a folder icon. And then you can change the color of the folder. So I typically will make it like a pale red, maybe slightly darker. That's fine. And then now it's very clear to me that this is a folder that I'm going to back up. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Alt and click these visibility buttons. So click it once, click it twice until it's red. So that means anything that goes into this backup folder will not be visible in my render or in my viewport. Next, I want to make a layer. It's very important to learn how to use layers if you are going to be making some heavier scenes. Early on, it's not very important, but it does come in handy if you have cameras with keyframes. And I'll show an example of that in a minute, but first I'm going to make a backup layer. And I'm going to change this color by double clicking on the little box there, and then I'm going to color pick that. So now I have a backup layer, and I'm going to turn off, so these stand for Solo, View, Render, Manager, which is the object manager, Lock, Animation, Generator, Deformer, Expression, and X-Reference. And I'm going to turn off all of these at the back end. And just leave these on. This is just what I'll typically, whenever I make something and throw it into my backup folder, I also throw it into here, and then I'll just stop it from taking up calculation time in my scene. But as for the benefits of using layers in your project would be, especially when it comes to animation. So if I were to animate this cube, say on the Y, I'm going to move forward in time to 120 frames, or 118, doesn't matter, something like that, and then keyframe that. Now I have an animation that goes up, right? But if I were to use a rigging tag, protection tag, is it rigging? Yes, rigging, protection. That locks my gizmo, but that also means that it locks my animation. So I can't get this to move while also not being manipulatable, right? So instead, if I come over to layers and I, say lock layer, we'll call it that, so that way we'll know what it is. I'm going to put the cube in that lock layer and then lock it. And now I can't select the cube and move it, right? But it does still animate, so I don't have to worry that my animation won't happen. And so if I had a protection tag on and tried to render it out, it will not animate, whereas with the locked layer it will still animate it, and I can't mess it up, so it'll be fine. But I'm going to delete that lock layer, delete that cube. I don't need it for my default scene, but if you would like one, feel free to do so. Next, moving forward, I'm going to move on to the render settings. There's quite a bit I'm going to change in here, just because I'm not only going to change the render settings for standard, but I'm also going to change it for all the other renders as well. Because any settings that are set in those renders, even though they're not the one being used, will be stored in the default scene save that we're about to create in a minute. So the first thing I always change when it comes to the render is I go straight to the output, and then I come to this little preset drop down here, film and video 1080-24. That gets me pretty much exactly where I want to be almost. I typically turn on lock ratio in case I need to make a smaller version, like 1280 by 720. It automatically does that for me. So I always have that button on. The next thing is optionally you can turn on all frames. I'm going to leave mine at current frame just because I will try and render out a single frame just to see how long it's going to take for a single frame to render, but you don't have to do that. You can just turn on all frames and it'll always render out all of the frames that have been that are down in your timeline. So next is I'm going to really quickly teach you a tiny bit, just a smidge about tokens. What tokens are is they are a way that you basically tell the program to reference something in your scene, whether it be a take or what camera you're using, what's the date, or maybe the author's name or the user's name on the computer. In this case, I want it to be the project name, so I'm going to use this little drop down here. I'm going to go down to project name, and it'll give me the token for project. And then I'm going to then name it render. And then I want to copy this exact same thing, and I'm going to use a / here. And so what a / will do is it's going to make a folder named whatever the project name is, plus the word render, right next to wherever the project is saved at. So if I saved it to my animation Art 184 or Art 185 class, and I had a nice special folder for that, and then I saved my, assignment project in there, then I'll have a folder named assignment _ render, whatever. Um, and inside of that folder, we need the files to be named. So all the pictures that come out will then be named the same thing, the name of whatever your project is, plus the word render, and then it'll be a series of 00000001 and so on and so forth. The next thing that I change is the format type. I'm going to change this to PNG because that supports the alpha channel. And in my case, I often use the alpha channel, so I'm going to check on alpha channel. But you don't necessarily have to. What the alpha channel does is it just gives you a transparent background in any parts that are transparent in your scene. And I often use that, but maybe you might not, so you don't have to turn that one on. It's up to you. So next is anti-aliasing. In the anti-aliasing tab, I like to change the anti-aliasing to best from geometry. This will just give you a better quality render. From here, let's move on to the physical render. In here, there's nothing you need to change, so leave it the same. And then next is the viewport renderer. In here, we are going to go to the viewport renderer tab, and we are going to, in the filter tab, check on geometry only. In the basic tab, we are going to copy effects from viewport, and that should go ahead and give us all the exact same settings that were in our viewport settings, so we're good there. And last but not least, if you are using Redshift, then go ahead and follow along in this part, and if not, just skip to the preferences part. But here in Redshift, there's just two quick things I'd change, which is I'm going to turn off multipass image, and in the Redshift tab, turn on denoising to just make things a little bit clearer after doing a render because they often end up noisy. And then now I'm going to switch back to the standard renderer because I want my default renderer to be the standard. But if you notice you're using the viewport renderer more or whatever, just change your renderer to that one and that'll be the one that it opens to automatically. I don't want multipass on, so I'm going to just go ahead and close this part out. And now let's go ahead and save our default scene. The way we do that is we go Window, Customization, Save as Default Scene. That will then name this project as new.c4d, and we just need to close it out. And now we're in a brand new project, and it has all of our settings in there, and we don't need to worry about needing to set those over and over and over again anymore, because now they are our default. Now from here, let's move on really quickly to the preferences. There's maybe only two things in the preferences, so I go to Edit Preferences, that I want to change. One is to go to the Files tab and turn on autosave. Every 10 minutes and 5 copies is, I think, a pretty good amount. If you need more copies, turn up that number, or if you want it to happen faster or slower, change the amount of minutes. And the other thing I change is in the Viewport Display tab, I turn on Draw Work Plane Behind. And I'm going to show really quickly what that does. So when you make a cube in your scene, you can see that this work plane, which is this grid that says where the floor of your world is, often shows in front of the geometry and can sometimes get in the way when you're trying to look at the stuff in your scene. And so Edit, Preferences, Draw Work Plane Behind, you can see here now the work plane is no longer in front of my geometry, and it still exists in my scene, and I can still see that, you know, it's in the middle of my cube, but it's no longer in the way. So that's why I do that. Okay, so next things next, let's move on from Cinema 4D and we will move on to After Effects. So here in After Effects, it's more about preferences that I change in here than it is about making a default scene. So I'm going to just start off with Edit, Preferences. Let's start off in General. And here in the General area, first things first that I turn on that is the most important is the center anchor point in new shape layers. What this will do is anytime you make a circle, a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, or draw a new shape, it will put the anchor point at the center of that shape. The next one that I typically turn on, which you don't have to turn on, is default the position property to separate dimensions. This will give you a separate X and Y every single time you make a new layer. It comes in handy if you notice that you're often having to right click, position, and turn on separate dimensions. If you're not having to do that very often, then you don't need to worry about turning this on. The next thing that I want to change is moving on to import. Here in import, I want to change sequence footage to 24 frames per second. What this keeps you from having to do is anytime you import a PNG sequence, you often have to right-click the PNG sequence, go to interpret footage, main, and change the frames per second to be 24 frames per second. And you might think if you do it just to one that it'll do it to the rest, but it will not. So the only way to get it to do it for every single import that you do is to change this number here in the settings. The next thing that I like to change is going to grids and guides. In here we have a proportional grid. I like to change this from 8 by 6 to 3 by 3. And I use this to give me a rule of thirds grid that I can use to position things better in my scene. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK on that. So that's all I really needed to change for. Oh wait, sorry, one last thing. So edit, preferences, this is the most important thing you need to change in autosave. You want to make sure that your autosave is turned on. It typically is by default, but just in case, come in, check it, maybe change this from 20 minutes to 10 minutes so that you're only losing 10 minutes of work instead of 20 minutes of work. So go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so that is nice and saved. Now from here, I'm going to talk about, this is optional. So this one you really don't have to follow along. If you think you've gotten all you can get out of this, you can stop here. But I'm going to make a template scene. And so the way that you make, I guess what I would typically use as a template scene is I would create some folders for things that I'm going to import so that I can have things a little bit more organized. So I might start with, assets. And then maybe I need another folder for maybe my main comps. So main underscore comps. I don't want it to be inside that folder. Make another folder, maybe this is my pre-comps. So on and forth as you're making things, or you're noticing you're needing to organize into things like this, create some folders like that, and then maybe start with a comp that you're always making. So I might make a main comp so that I can composite all of the stuff that I made in this project all into one. Because typically what you'll do is like see for the typography assignment or for the bouncing balls assignment or anything else, you want to make all the comps in the same project and then composite them into another comp. Whereas if you're making them in a bunch of individual other projects, you're needing to find a way to merge them all together and it becomes difficult. So I would make one comp in here, call it main, and then I want to change this preset from 29.97 to 24 frames per second, so that way I'm not always needing to change that. And then 30 seconds is pretty good. Sometimes you might need longer, but I think that's okay. Then leave all the other settings the same and hit OK. So now we have a main comp, we have all this asset stuff, and maybe even in the main comp I can make a solid. So right click, new solid, and let's go with that. So that way I know I have a background. So I'm gonna hit enter BG. And then I'll show real quick what I was talking about for the grid. So if I turn on proportional grid, you see I get this nice rule of thirds grid in here that I can use, as well as a title action save, but I can't use these at the same time, unfortunately. But I can at least switch between them, so that's something. And then, so that's looking good. I might throw my solids inside of my assets folder. And I think this looks like it'll work well. So then what I would do next is go File, Save, and then save this to somewhere on your computer that you'll just be able to navigate back to, but also that's not going to be in the way because I don't think you want to delete this. after you've done it. So I'm going to just save this here and hit save. And in my case, I already made one, but to test it out. But I'm going to just go ahead and do that. And then I need to go to Edit, Preferences, New Project. And in there, I can point this at something. So New Project Loads Template, and find that scene that I wanted to make my default scene, and then hit OK. And now that that's saved, anytime I hit Close Project and I get a new project, it's going to be this template that I've loaded into there with all of my folders and everything, my solid and all that. I should be good. Alrighty. Hopefully I covered everything I wanted to cover. If you have any questions for me regarding anything in this video or beyond, please feel free to reach out to me on Slack. Um, I'm here for you guys. I hope that you'll be willing to come join me in tutoring and utilize the free tutoring that is offered to you with your classes. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.